Good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome to NJPAC's Virtual Business Partners Roundtable, the Art Center's series of online conversations with business executives and government leaders from New Jersey and beyond. In the past, we've held these events on our campus here in Newark. Now, we're happy to be able to share these fascinating discussions with all of you virtually. I want to thank our Business Partners Committee Chair, Joel Sherman of Atlantic Tomorrow's office, for his consistently valuable advice on the planning of this series. And I thank our friends at PNC Bank for sponsoring these business partner roundtable gatherings. Often these events feature a panel of thought leaders in a particular field, but today I'm really happy that we have 45 minutes with one very important guest, and that's Scott Kirby, the CEO of United Airlines. Born in Texas, Scott graduated from the United States Air Force Academy with a degree in computer science and operations research, and he began his career at the Pentagon. He began his work in the airline industry when he joined America West Airlines in 1995. He rose through the ranks and became president of US Airways in 2006 when it merged with America West. He became president of American Airlines in 2013 and president of United Airlines in 2016. Just about a year ago, in May 2020, he was named United CEO. So just a reminder to everyone of our timing this morning. This is a 45-minute session, 30 minutes of question and answers with Scott and me, followed by 15 minutes of questions from all of you in the house. If you want to ask Scott a question, you can do so at any time by typing it into the Q&A box. And you can find the Q&A box when you hover your cursor at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Scott Kirby, welcome to the roundtable. It's good to have you here.
Good morning. Thank you. I had to wait for the invitations to unmute and unvideo.
You know, when this is all over, we will all understand the Zoom protocols, but not a moment before that. You know,
the most common words these days are "you're on mute."
Exactly right. So, where do we find you this morning?
I am in Dallas, at my house in Dallas. This is where I've spent most of the quarantine period, but I've started getting back to Chicago and around the system. In fact, I'm going to be in Newark there in a couple of weeks. Looking forward to it.
Right. So you stepped into your current role as the leader of United in May 2020. We were in the height of the pandemic. I can't imagine a more challenging situation. What was it like?
Well, you know, it's certainly not the way I expected to start, but in a way, it certainly accelerated the learning curve, accelerated our culture change at United. It really gave me and I think our whole team the opportunity to quickly, begin changing the culture to what we wanted it to be. And, we were early at United, and we were the only airline really that thought this was going to be a serious event in early March. So we started fundraising early and cutting costs and doing all the things that we had to. But it also allowed us to pivot our focus to customer service and really changing that. And one of the things we've been the proudest of as we've gone through this is an over 30-point improvement in our net promoter scores from customers. And really, I just got off a call. We do a 7:45 call every single morning, 365 days a year. I just got off that 7:45 Central before we got in this call. And again, talking about some new things that we're doing to make the customer experience better. It's been an opportunity to transform the culture much quicker than we would have thought otherwise.
That's a huge change in your customer satisfaction ratings. How do you account for it in terms of your team members' behavior, in terms of customer expectations? What accounts for it?
Look, it's a combination of things, but it's mostly about how we make, I've taken to saying as the CEO, I have two jobs. One, make our employees proud, and two, make customers like us. We're an airline. I hope to aspire to love. I'll get to like first, and then we can aspire to getting our customers to love us. But then just doing the things, to treat customers fairly, transparently. Getting rid of change fees was a big thing that we did during
that was a big deal.
But all the communication stuff. We run this tool called Connection Saver as an example. Yesterday, we saved 1,400 connections for customers by holding flights by 5 to 6 minutes. Just there's and it feels different with our employees as well. Because the other thing those kinds of changes do is makes our employees feel empowered to do the right thing for customers. If they've spent a career slamming the door on customers that are waiting for connections, they know that's the wrong thing to do. We put them in a position of defending the indefensible. All of us would become jaded, and it's hard to deliver good customer service when the company is forcing you to do things that you think are bad for customers. And so taking those positive steps reinforces to the employees that we want them to do, that they're empowered to do the right thing for customers, and they're doing it.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like you're not only giving them permission, you're encouraging them to do it.
And we're giving them proof points that it's okay. For years, this happens at all airlines. You tell employees, we want you to do the right thing for the customer, but then someone shows up and says, hey, my grandmother passed away. I need to move my flight by a week because I'm going to be going to a funeral instead. You say, well, okay, sir, but you have to pay a $200 change fee. Like if you're the employee saying that, that wasn't right.
Right.
But you're forced to do it. And then the company tells you, I want you to do the right thing for customers. You're like, they don't believe you. And they were correct. Because you have rules and policies that forced them to do the wrong thing for customers. And so those are, as much as anything, proof points to employees that we want them to do the right thing and that they're empowered to do the right thing.
Yeah, I'm a United flyer almost exclusively.
Thank you.
Whenever I get you, you're welcome. Of course, I haven't flown. I've flown once in the last 13 months, and I'll tell you 2 proof points for me as a customer that reinforced my loyalty. I got an email from United a couple of weeks ago, and it said, "Did you know you have a credit with us?" Like, no, I didn't know I had a credit with you. And I clicked the thing, and all of a sudden I had $385 that I didn't know I had. And you could very easily have sort of sat on that or let it expire or any number of things, but I'm sure I wasn't alone in getting that notification, and that made me feel the airline cared. The other thing is, and I think customer service on airlines, and you know this a million times better than I do, it is such a hard thing, I would imagine, to keep up on a consistent, predictable basis. Everyone is being asked to behave well against all odds, right?
Yeah.
I was boarding a flight to Miami, and I had a garment bag. And I was sitting in coach, and as I got into the plane, as I entered the plane, holding my bag, I said to the flight attendant, I wonder if you could help me. And he said, I know what you want. You'd like me to hang your bag right here, wouldn't you? And I went, yeah, exactly, right. So he was a mind reader. And,
good.
I'm sure there's a lot of that goes on too, right?
Yeah, it's it's good to hear. And the first point you make, particularly trying to communicate more proactively. The other thing, you need to get back flying, by the way. You'll feel great when you do. But as soon as you start flying again, we're so much better at telling you what's going on. And, when we know that there's weather coming, which happens, especially, they're in Newark, we'll get weather, proactively communicating and giving customers options. And look, things are going to happen. Weather's going to happen. Sometimes we're going to have maintenance delays. We're trying to minimize them, but they're going to happen. The best thing we can do is be transparent and honest. People are generally understanding if you can tell them what's going on, but if they feel like you're hiding the ball, it's incredibly frustrating. And so the more we can, we were much, much better, and we're doing things that no airline in the world is doing to communicate those kinds of things to customers and just be transparent.
So before we talk more about United and the present state of affairs in the industry, can we go back a bit and talk about your career trajectory? I know, having read that as a young man, you wanted to be a professional athlete. How about that?
Well, I grew up in my small town. I thought I was a good athlete, and I wanted to be a professional athlete. And I remember exactly what happened, going to a larger town and getting to play on one of the baseball teams and realizing that I was kind of an average player, even at that level, and I was not going to be a professional athlete. So it was a little bit devastating for me. But I quickly got over it and found new interests to pursue.
And you went to the Air Force Academy, and then you worked at the Pentagon. How would you say those experiences informed your career and your approach as a leader?
Yeah, well, going to I went to the Air Force Academy because I wanted to be a fighter pilot and an astronaut. And much like a professional athlete, I realized when I was there, I was an average pilot. And so I wasn't going to be a fighter pilot or an astronaut.
Yeah.
But the Air Force Academy was a great experience for me. One, it gave me discipline, which I would have never had. High school, I never had to study or do anything. They force you to have discipline at the Air Force Academy.
Right.
But just learned great leadership lessons. And when I was there, I had instructors, I can't remember how many of them, who'd flown in Vietnam, and I had a sponsor, who shot down, in Vietnam, and listening to those people and just being around them, kind of the leadership, the character that you learn through osmosis as much as anything was pretty remarkable. And then I was fortunate when I did graduate to go work for one of the undersecretaries of defense at the Pentagon, Dr. Chu, and I worked in an office, economic analysis and resource planning. I was this young 21-year-old kid. Everyone else in the office, there were 4 PhD economists, all of whom had been there for at least 20 years, all of whom were brilliant. And it was like the coolest, 21, getting to be in the middle, feeling like you're in the middle of it. I mean, I was sitting in the back of the room, but I was in the middle of it, I felt like, and hearing everything that was going on from all these brilliant people was just fantastic.
Whose administration was that?
That was in the first Bush administration.
Who was the Secretary of Defense?
That would have been Rumsfeld back then.
Right.
And Dr. Chu was the undersecretary. He came back in the second Bush administration as well, though.
Yeah. So what was that culture like at the Pentagon, and what was the nature of leadership there, and what sort of lessons did you learn, if any, there?
Well, what was fascinating to me when I was there was that, I could be, again, 21 years old, and then in the room, it's a more hierarchical culture. So you can't have input in the room, but you can have input leading up to really what I thought were big decisions, crafting before. But it was also a great introduction to kind of how the world and government works. One of the jobs that we did in our group was liaise with Capitol Hill, and so I would talk to Senate and congressional staff, and this won't be, I suppose, a positive thing, but it was amazing to me to learn how influential things like how many jobs does this create in my district. I was naive, like we just picked the best thing. That wasn't always the way we did it. The other lesson that I can really remember learning is I participated in the Base Closure Commission in 1990 after the wall had come down and the military started reducing. And I remember going to an event at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyards, which were going to close. And I had always viewed things sort of spreadsheet kind of analysis, numbers. It was obvious we should close it. And I went, and I was just sitting in the back of the room, but I realized the impact it was going to have on people's lives. That was kind of the first time to me that decisions like that you're making, that was at not at corporate, but at a corporate level, and it's always stuck with me. Decisions like that you are making have real impact on people's lives outside of the spreadsheet that you're looking at. And it was an eye-opening to me to see that reaction for people when I was 21 or 22 years old.
Yeah, learning compassion as a young professional is a very useful thing, I would imagine. Yeah. I also, especially as you've had to live through this year, where folks have been furloughed and brought back and terminated.
Yeah.
So you have worked at several different airlines, majors, over the decades, and so there are similarities and there are differences in the way that airlines operate. What is it about how United is operated, how you lead United, that is a differentiator that sets it apart?
The strengths of an airline like United are we have the best route network in the world. We can get you to more places in the world, and the most potential for growing that route network, because United had kind of a decade where they were on the sidelines and didn't grow while everyone else was growing. But to be the largest, the most comprehensive, if you live in the Newark, New York region, to get you anywhere in the world better than any other airline, to provide the best service, to be the premium airline certainly for anyone that travels to and from the United States. And that's a huge strength, a huge history. We just celebrated our 95th anniversary. The opportunity at United, though, is to not be a big, bureaucratic, slow airline that's been around for 95 years has got really big. But to take what we had when I was at America West Airlines, which is I went to America West, small airline in Phoenix, right after it came out of bankruptcy in 1995. Like the whole executive team were in our late 20s or early 30s.
Wow.
And we were kind of learning on the fly. But we would go to lunch and we would all together and we would talk about ideas and things. And we would come back to the office, and instead of creating PowerPoint decks or an infinite analysis, we would just say, hey, this is a good idea, let's try it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's been an advantage during the pandemic for United is accelerating that kind of culture shift, where we have these executive team meetings. They're now 3 days a week for a couple of hours, but we have a goal. Every time we have a big decision, we actually make a decision and try it. And if it doesn't work, then we reverse course. That's also important. If you're going to be fast paced, you got to be willing to admit when you made a mistake and change. But that helps us immensely. And it's why United has kind of led through the crisis, because we've just been willing to make decisions and not get lost in PowerPoint decks, make decisions.
If you can, tell us some of the key decisions that you have made since May that you think have been real change makers for the airline, for the industry, for customers.
Well, the real starting point for us, I'll go back to the last weekend of February, which this is before, if you remember, it was like March 12th that the NBA shut down and the country started shutting down. At the end of February, we had been watching this in China, the COVID, and concerned about it.
When did you first become aware that this could be a crisis?
For me, I read a lot. I read about 3 hours a day on average. I read a book a week at least. And I read a book over the Christmas holidays that had just come out about the history of pandemics and its impact on society. It went back thousands of years and how it's changed society. And so it was in my head.
Was that a coincidence that you were reading?
It was totally a coincidence. Totally a coincidence.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, I read a lot, so maybe not. But and then so I was reading about it in China, but I was thinking of it through the lens of SARS and MERS, because that had impacted the airline industry. And those biases were in my head that this could be like SARS or MERS, particularly if we see it show up outside of Asia. I'm going to worry about it and think it's like SARS or MERS. So I was paying a lot of attention to it, and actually went to China in late January and had a conversation with my wife about should I go or not.
Really?
I did. But at the end of February, when it showed up in Italy, that was over a weekend. It was the last weekend of February. I started calling our executive team, and I'd already been appointed CEO. I wasn't CEO yet, but had been appointed. Oscar was gracious and kind of let me run it. Right. And I called everyone and started getting them together and said, it was clear that it was highly contagious. The asymptomatic transfer and 2-week incubation period meant that if it showed up in Italy, the genie was already out of the bottle. It was already a pandemic. We just didn't know. People weren't saying it yet, but it was. There was no way it wasn't worldwide at that point, was my view. And because of that, we started that very first week of January. We did a $2 billion financing deal. We started all the exercises for addressing costs. We started working on safety health initiatives the first week of March. Before anyone else had done it. It really let us get a head start. And I can remember sitting with this executive leadership conference in Chicago the first week of March. And instead of being out in the conference room, I was in a little war room in the back, and a series of people were coming through, like, what are we going to do for this? We were meeting all day about COVID. And everyone would come in and have a little 10-minute speech of this is going to be a global pandemic. And we got to, at first you'd just see a look of shock on their face. I'm like, why are we saying this and no one else is? But what was amazing is by the time we got to the middle of March, once it became clear it was a global pandemic, everyone was like, wow, we saw this coming ahead of everyone else. And it just gave our team confidence that the steps we were taking, that we had our eye on the ball and that we were being realistic. And that was what set the tone for us to manage through the rest of the crisis.
Mm-hmm. The whole world seemed to close down in mid-March. Did you at that time simply look at the universe and eliminate flights and get ready for a long haul at that point? And can you talk about the progression from from essentially a quiet nation that wasn't flying to a nation now that seems intent on getting back on airplanes?
Well, first, the original impact, while we expected it to be bad, was far worse than we thought. I thought that the initial impact the world would look something like it does right now, with revenues down 60 to 70%. So people not traveling unless they had to, but still going to see family, still going on business trips that were essential. Maybe we wear masks and have safety protocols. But SARS and MERS, when they happened, revenue was down 5 or 10%. We actually said at a conference in early March, we thought it would be down 70%. Instead, it was down 99.5%. I mean, we just shut. The only people that were flying on our airplanes basically were people coming into New York, New Jersey, medical professionals to help deal with that, as that was the epicenter of the crisis at the beginning. And there was incredible uncertainty about how long it would last, how long it would take. I was obsessively reading the science and trying, but no one knew. And so for us, with revenue down 99%, we were burning $100 million of cash per day.
Wow.
We had $6 billion in the bank before this all started.
Yes.
Do the math, we didn't have long to last.
Right.
We were very focused on the government and the first CARES Act. But what we were planning to do, if the CARES Act hadn't have passed, we would have just run out of cash at that pace.
Right.
Because we were going to literally mothball the airline, completely stop flying. We would have furloughed 100% of employees at that point, and in order to just hope that you could survive until it was over and then come back. I can remember, like, a joke that I sleep 8.5 hours a night. I'm a great sleeper. That was like one of the only time I can remember having a week in my life of sleepless nights. And it was thinking about what this would mean to employees if the government intervention didn't pass. Fortunately, the government, bipartisan response, huge kudos to both sides of the aisle for that. And what it did was give us a bridge to get through the initial crisis, go off and we just finished a deal yesterday that we raised another $11 billion. We've raised about $30 billion of capital going through the crisis. But it gave us the time and a bridge to do that. So we could be here, we could keep the infrastructure in place and keep employees current, so that we are now able to come back and start flying. And what we see today is, kind of 100% recovery in leisure demand. Business demand is still down 80%. My guess is that's going to start to inflect in September when schools are back and people are starting to be back in offices. My guess is if you go to downtown Newark, and certainly if you go to Manhattan, offices are pretty empty right now.
Yeah, that's correct.
Start to come back. And then long haul international is also completely shut down because you can't go without quarantining. But once those quarantine rules end, I think there'll be a huge pent-up demand for travel. And so, we've got the first third of it done. Business demand, I think, will be later this year.
Right.
And, long haul international, maybe a little bit after that. But it's encouraging. We've gotten back to our core cash burn being positive. So even in this world, we're able to kind of minimize cash burn and be prepared for the future.
So if you don't mind, for somebody with a job like the one you have, you seem remarkably, pardon the expression, normal and at peace. Now, I'm not sure if that's true or not, but when you tell me that you sleep 8.5 hours a day, that you read 3 hours a day, it seems to me this is a guy who tries really hard to have a work-life balance. Is that right or wrong?
That is right. I have a good work-life balance. I have a wonderful family. One of the largest silver lining of the pandemic has been spending time with family and kids. I have my 7th child during the pandemic.
7th child.
So she probably wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for the pandemic. So I'll never complain about it.
What's the age range of your kids?
Well, it was 2 marriages. So 25, 21, 19. 7, 5, 3, 2 months.
Wow, you're a brave man.
Yeah, it's been great, and my daughters, both the 2 college-age daughters, have had their schools have been virtual, and so they've come and stayed with us for a couple of months at a time with 5 or 6 friends, because we have a guest house and they've stayed in the guest house, and so it's just been the family stuff. Has been great going through this.
Yeah. I hear that from a lot of folks, and that is it's been an unexpected opportunity to reconnect with extended family and re-engage with kids.
And I didn't appreciate how much I had missed before, and I'm not going to continue to live like I do now, but I'm never going back to 100% of what I did before. Take my son to school every morning, have breakfast with the kids, have dinner with the
Yeah.
kids every day.
Yeah,
really
for
nice.
sure. So let's talk about United in Newark. What changes or innovations are you contemplating for United here in Jersey?
Yeah, so we're looking forward to getting back to growing again once this is over, getting the full schedule back. You know, Newark has been one of the places that has been, Newark and New York, hardest hit by COVID. A disproportionate amount of business traffic and long haul international. I mean, that's one of the strengths for Newark is all the long haul international, and that's still going to probably take longer to come back because, you know, again, when the borders are closed, you're not going to go to Paris for a week if you have to quarantine for 2 weeks when you get to Paris. But it will come back. And we have incredible confidence in the long term in coming back. And so what we're trying to do now is take advantage of the crisis to finish focusing on the infrastructure at Newark, the club, and we're working with the Port Authority on accelerating runway. So we can get some of that work. We're going to get a lot of work done on the runway this summer, for example, that otherwise would have caused delays in the future because you'd be taking, but now we can accommodate it and get a lot of that work done. Looking forward to Terminal A being done, working with the Port Authority to hopefully get even more gates there for the ultimate growth at Newark. And then we'd like to work on particularly the front of the house for Terminal C. That's not the best customer experience. And work with the port on what we can do to improve the experience for customers and make it easier to get in through the checkpoint, through security, and to the aircraft.
Of the three majors in the metropolitan area, is Newark the busiest of the three airports, or JFK?
I'm not sure in total number of operations, but Newark is, at least relative to capacity, is the busiest. You know, we love Newark. It's a great airport, but sadly, because of the infrastructure, Newark is the #1 delay airport in the country. There's simply more flights than the airport was designed to handle. You know, I was really encouraged that President Biden in his first press conference, you know, actually had a line where he said, you know, something about over 20%, because of the infrastructure, over 20% of the flights are delayed, 1.5 million man hours. And sadly, Newark is #1, but which none of us like. I'm sure no one on this call likes, and we certainly don't like. But it's encouraging that the president is working on infrastructure that could start to improve those things and increase capacity. That's the key. We've got to increase the capacity at an airport like Newark in order to make it, you know, effective, as effective as it can be.
Right. United is one of the largest employers in Newark, Greater Newark. How many employees do you have here, and what role do you think the airline plays in the city's economy?
Yeah, so we are really proud. We don't do enough to talk about it at United, but we have 14,000 employees that are direct employees. And what we do, or we create, and we about 100,000 with indirect effects. We're incredibly, you know, if businesses are wanting to site somewhere, the ability to have nonstop flights to all the places they need to fly, particularly international destinations, is critical to recruiting high quality jobs into a community. And you know, but also the jobs that we create in Newark. I think some of these stats will surprise people. Our average wide body captain, you know, flying the long haul international, all in, including benefits, makes over $400,000 a year.
Wow,
that's a pretty good job. Our average maintenance technician working on airplanes, once they hit the top of scale, once they've been at the airline 12 years, makes over $150,000 a year. And average gate agents and rampers make over $100,000 a year. There are not a lot of jobs in this country that can have those kinds of pay and benefit to support a family. I like saying my father-in-law worked at United for 42 years, and he worked in customer service and retired, was working on the ramp, but was able, you know, to raise a family. And once they had 3 kids, his wife stopped working, and he worked overtime and he worked hard to do it. But, you know, was able to, you know, raise a family, send kids to college, and you know, and support a family in a job like that. There's just not enough jobs in the United States like that. So not only does United create a lot of jobs, not only do we have a lot of economic impact, we create some really good jobs for people in communities like Newark.
You know, since the murder of George Floyd, there's been a renewed and consistent conversation around the country on social justice, and many corporations and nonprofits like us are talking about and acting on diversity, equity, and inclusion in ways we haven't before. Just last week, you announced a major new effort to bring more diversity to United and to the airline industry more broadly. Tell us about what you're planning at United's Aviate Academy.
Yeah, Bill, thanks. So first, what I would say is there's an awful lot of talk about diversity in corporate America, and there's not much action. There's not enough action. And so what we did was take action. And the United Aviate Academy is, we're the first U.S. airline to create our own flight training school, where we expect to train at least 500 pilots a year for the next decade. And what we're going to do that's unique is today, if you want to be an airline pilot, commercial airline pilot, you basically have to be in the military, or you have to go off and get your own training and certification. You got to pay, and it's $100,000 to $150,000 to go get enough training that you can even start the process to become a commercial aviation pilot. And that's a huge barrier to entry for people. You've basically got to be wealthy or in a military or in the military. And because of that, over 80% of our pilots are white men. Less than 20% of our pilots are women or people of color. And of course, women and people of color are equally able with the same training to be just as good a pilot. They just don't have access to get training and start. So we've created a training academy where we're going to select, and we're going to have at least 50% of the people that come through the academy are going to be women or people of color. It gives us the opportunity to access a huge reservoir of untapped talent, people that just don't have the chance today. We're going to give them scholarships to go to training. To be clear, once they go to training, they're going to have to pass all this. That doesn't mean they're going to necessarily be a pilot. They're going to have to pass all the same safety, certification, training, testing requirements. And just like a lot of white men, some of these people will wash out of pilot training and won't make it through. But I'm sure they'll have the same graduation rates as anyone else. But when they do make it through, they'll have a career at United Airlines. And we're really proud of that. And I thought this was important for a real diversity effort before we announced it. Given some of the backlash and given some of the things that I've read and even seen on one news network, I think it's even more important than I thought before. I think I actually was naive to think how I thought our country had progressed further on racism was less overt and it was more subtle and people subconscious. It's become clear to me that race is a bigger issue than I even had appreciated. And so what we did, I think is even more important, and I'm even prouder of it, given some of the backlash that we've gotten as a result.
Yeah. Have you, in developing Aviate, have you discovered that your peers across the industry are enthusiastic about an idea like that? Do you imagine that others will join in with you in on that?
I've heard from one other big airline only, and I suspect that they're going to do something similar. They applauded it, believe very much like us. So I wouldn't be surprised if one other one doesn't do it, but the others I haven't. I suspect we'll be the only two that do it.
Yeah. Well, maybe as you advance it and as you prove the model, others will take you up on it.
And look, I also hope this can be the kind of template that applies outside of aviation. Germany has these great apprenticeship programs, but this is about giving people opportunity. Equality to me is about equal opportunity, and the reality is, in our country today, people don't have equal opportunity. And let's give them the opportunity. And finding these kind of apprenticeship training programs where you can go into communities or genders where people haven't historically had the opportunity. Just give them the opportunity. Then they've got to succeed or fail just like everyone else does. But just give them the chance to get started. And to me, that's perhaps the biggest thing we can do to address diversity, because creating economic opportunity is going to solve a lot of other problems. I mean, think about someone that grows up on the south side of Chicago and gets to go to the United Aviate Academy. 25 years later, is making in today's dollars $400,000 a year flying a wide body. Not just the difference that it makes in that person's life and that family's life, the difference they can make in their community. Creating economic opportunity, is lack of economic opportunity is the foundation that all these other problems. It's the crumbling foundation that all these other problems are built on top of.
Yeah, great. Well, good luck with it.
Thank you.
I'm sure it'll succeed. Let's talk about sustainability for a minute. It's a big concern for the airline industry. what is your approach to mitigating the environmental impact of air travel? And do you have any initiatives in the planning stages that would address that?
Yeah. So United is unique amongst corporations, and certainly in aviation, but amongst corporations, I think, in our true commitment to sustainability. And I am personally passionate and committed to sustainability. I've told you that I read 3 hours a day.
Yeah. By the way, what are your go-tos in your 3 hour a day reads?
So I read the Wall Street Journal basically cover to cover, which is kind of an hour and a half a day. I mean, a lot of times I'm catching up on the weekends, but
okay.
And then I read Scientific American, Discover, magazines that I've read since I was in high school. And then I read about a book a week. Is how you
and
get.
What book are you reading now?
Right now, I'm rereading Brave New World because I just read Code Breakers, which is Walter Isaacson's book about CRISPR-Cas9, and it talks about Brave New World. I'd read it like when I was in 8th or 9th grade and had forgotten it. Right. But it's fascinating to go back and read. I mean, he wrote it in the 1930s, and now we have technology that could create that world. And before that, I just finished Bill Gates' book. And before that, I read a book about the Ottoman Empire. But anyway, so I've been interested in climate change since the mid-'80s. And it was clear back then that it was probably true. The good news is today, I don't think there's no one serious that denies climate change is real. But we've got to get it down to zero, because if we don't, there are catastrophic things. People don't appreciate the catastrophic impacts that could happen from climate change. There's these tipping points that if you tip over the tipping point, there are positive feedback loops, which just make it worse. And it could just be life altering. So we have to get it under control. It's the most important issue for our generation to solve. And so at United, we're really trying to solve issues. We fly airplanes, and airplanes are going to emit carbon. There are parts of our economy that can't be decarbonized. Things like airplanes, making concrete, making steel. And so it's naive to say we're just going to go to all zero. But what we're doing, one is sustainable aviation fuels. We are the only airline that I know of in the US that's invested in companies. We've got more coming. We have announced the EcoSky's Alliance partnership this week for partners with sustainable aviation fuel. But this is taking, what are otherwise waste product and turning it into fuel. It's a lot more expensive today than aviation fuel. But we got to invest in it. We are lobbying for federal support for it so we can do much like wind and solar and drive down the cost curve to make it sustainable. That's important pillar number one for us. The second pillar is R&D on things like electric aircraft, hydrogen-powered aircraft. They're never going to replace our flight from Newark to Delhi because the energy density simply isn't high enough. But for some short haul, there's probably things that can be done. We were a launch partner with Archer Aviation. Part of the mission there is, using it like kind of a helicopter service almost to get in and out of Newark is one of the use cases for that. And then the third big one is carbon sequestration. And this is the one that I'm probably the most passionate about because so many corporations, when they say they're going to get to net zero, they're using carbon offsets. And carbon offsets are basically planting trees. And you go to these opaque groups that don't tell you what they're doing. They just say, we're going to go plant trees and we're going to do it. It's completely hidden. A lot of it's not real. But the reality is, even if it is a good project, we emit 4,000 times as much carbon as we did in the pre-industrial era. We cannot plant 4,000 times as many trees. There is not room on the planet. And so we have to accept that we're going to have to spend money on sequestration. And so United was a launch partner in what will be the world's first commercial scale, largest carbon sequestration project with Occidental and 1.5. And each plant will be the equivalent of planting 40 million trees per year. And so those are the three big pillars for us. But it's also important that we talk about realistic solutions. And I would recommend Bill Gates' book. He says a lot of the same things I did, fortunately. But for real solutions, it is solvable. But we're not going to be able to take the easy way out on things like carbon offsets. We're going to have to actually take some hard work, invest in R&D technology, and we can solve the problem. But if we don't, it's an ugly future.
Yeah, it really sounds like you're passionate about sort of two issues that are totally top of mind in the country now, and that is diversity and inclusion, and a renewed focus on the environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I've realized being the CEO now at United, going through the crisis, is I'd always kind of focus on how are we the best airline in the world, and we're going, for all of those customers that are listening on the call, we're going to be the best airline in the world, and you're going to have confidence in that. But we actually have a unique platform. We're a high-profile company, and when something bad happens, that's awful because we're on the front page of every newspaper and on Good Morning America and the Today Show and everything else. But it also, the flip side of that coin is we can actually do more than just be a great airline. We can make a difference in the world. Those are the two big pillars that we are focused on: diversity and inclusion, and sustainability. To not just make a difference for United Airlines, but to lead and to do things that others, not just in aviation, but that others can copy, and try to blaze a trail that'll actually make a real difference. And I hope someday when I retire, that what gets written about me in the Wall Street Journal is, he did a great job as CEO. Here's all the good things it did for the airline and the best stock performance. But the two big things were diversity and inclusion and sustainability. But those are the things that people remember.
Yeah. Look, you can't retire. You have too many kids. Yeah, you have to.
I know. I owe it to them.
So we're going to run a few minutes late. Do you have another 4 or 5?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Okay, great. So let's go. We have a couple of questions from the house. So my colleague Chelsea Keys has them. So Chelsea, what do you got?
Thanks, Scott, and thanks, John. So our first question comes from Joel Sherman of Atlantic Tomorrow's office, and he asks, in specific terms, what are a couple of goals you had for your airline that proved harder to reach than you anticipated?
Well, I guess that's hard to say given the pandemic. I mean, every goal that we had at our board meeting in February got thrown out the window. I'd say one of the biggest challenges that we have right now that remains a goal is working with the government on air traffic control, air traffic reform, work that we can do and work that they can do. Newark is front and center here. It is the #1 delayed airport in the country, and that's because it says the runways are what they are. The airspace, we've got to do more with the runways. And that's where the constraint is. It's not about gates. It's about the runways and the airspace. That's where all the delays come from. And so how can we have the airspace be more efficient? Today, we have next generation, it's called next gen technology, but essentially using GPS approaches and things that we could increase capacity at airports. We could reduce carbon emissions by about 10%. And it's just been incredibly frustrating that we can't get projects like that over the finish line. So I would say one big goal for us, one that I've been frustrated for a long time, that as an industry and an airline we haven't been able to get resolved, is getting next generation air traffic control over the finish line. I'm cautiously optimistic in the new administration that we're going to make progress. But this is one of those few things that's win-win. It can increase capacity at airports. It reduces carbon emissions. It reduces delays. It reduces the amount of time that you're spending in the air. So I am hopeful we can get that done.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Bruce Levin, and he asks, the 737 MAX was a major issue in the airline industry. How can this type of technology issue be addressed in the future should such a problem arise again?
Well, first, the MAX is back flying and is completely safe. And the issues that caused the MAX, I think Boeing, but not just Boeing, the whole aerospace industry has learned lessons about the manufacturing design and interaction with regulator process. The great news in aviation is it is by far, the safest mode of transport, and frankly, the safest industry you're going to see anywhere. And while the 2 MAX accidents were horrific, the most dangerous part of your journey, anytime you fly, by far, is the drive to and from the airport. Probably hundreds of times more dangerous. So it is incredibly safe. We have huge safety protocols in place. And look, just within the last week, we have once again grounded the MAX aircraft for an issue that I think is going to be relatively straightforward to fix, about a grounding of a piece of equipment. But that's the bias in the aviation industry. Anytime there's an issue that we think is an issue, we don't take chances. Safety is front and center. So I am incredibly confident in the safety of the MAX, and glad to have it back and flying.
So here's my last question to you, and that is, do me a favor and look into your crystal ball. And what will air travel look like a year from now? And will the pandemic have a lasting impact on how we travel?
Yeah, so I'll go 2 years from now, because I'm not sure that all the international borders will be open a year from now. But 2 years from now, I think the international borders will basically be open again. I think business demand will have recovered fully. I don't think that people are going to do this as opposed to interacting in person. We didn't talk about that extensively today, but business travel is not about transactions. It's about relationships. We don't go on business trips to sign. I don't fly to New York to close a deal to sign a piece of paper because I need to physically sign a piece of paper. I go to interact with my partners and with the bankers, and to go to dinner and to get to know them and to create relationships. Business demand is about relationships. And you can't build relationships. You may be able to maintain them for a while on Zoom, but you cannot build new relationships on Zoom. I've joked that the last time a business tries to do a sales call on Zoom is when they lose their first sale to a competitor who showed up in person. So I think business travel is coming back. I think international demand is going to come back. So what'll be different? I think that there will be heightened protocols on safety, health, cleanliness of airplanes. A lot of what we've done during the pandemic, we're going to continue to do forever. I think it's going to be important. One of the other little interesting things that we've learned is that I suspect we'll keep doing it. We hand out the little, what do we call them, towelette things, for wiping down. Have a flight attendant do it when you get on, which we'll probably continue to do, not just because it gives you the peace of mind to wipe down, but it creates an interaction with a human interaction as you get on the airplane. The flight attendant talking to each and every person. Just a simple little thing. But that kind of stuff, I think, will stay in place. I think the other thing that's a more societal change as well is, like, anyone that wanted to pretend we were not a part of the global community before simply can't do that now. And I say this because it matters to sustainability. Anything that happens everywhere in the world impacts all of us. And that was true with COVID, and that is true with climate change. And so we have to solve problems like that together. And I hope that that's another change. I believe it will be another change that impacts the whole globe. It's much broader than aviation.
Yeah, well, as a leader of a global business that helps keep the world together, you have an important role to play now and going forward. So I think on behalf of all of us, we're glad you're doing it. And
thank you.
With such optimism and with such excellent historical context.
Well, thank you. And I look forward to being there in Newark soon and seeing some of you in person and get back to flying.
Yeah, and on behalf of all of us at the Art Center, thank you for united support of our institution and so many organizations in our greater Newark community. So stay well, and please keep up the good work. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and I hope you will be able to be with us for our next business-focused virtual gathering. We will have one of the Art Center's Conversations with Cooperman in May, featuring our longtime friend Lee Cooperman in discussion with former Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. That'll be interesting, right?
It will.
Please keep an eye on your email for an invitation to that event. It should be arriving soon. Until then, everybody stay well, stay safe. And Scott, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, John. I enjoyed it.
Take care. Bye.